It is 10 years since the murder of the Labour MP Jo Cox, and her sister, Kim Leadbeater, has been speaking about her legacy, and she urges a common ground between people. And this is her in an interview explaining what she means.
That's one of the things I find quite depressing, to be honest, 10 years after Jo was killed. And that short period of time where people said all the right things about doing politics differently. The fact that a young woman, a mum of 2 small children, who'd stood up to be a public servant, to be our MP for Batley and Spen, could be murdered in the street, literally 5 minutes from where I live. People said, whoa, hang on a minute, this isn't what our society should look like. This isn't the atmosphere that our politics should be conducted in. And for a short period of time, people said things should change. Sadly, that didn't last very long. And if anything, over the last 10 years, I think you're probably right. I think things probably are worse. And there's lots of different reasons for that. Lots of different factors, lots of different reasons.
Preet, do you agree with Kim that things have become more divisive?
Yes, I do. I mean, I was on the Jo Cox leadership programme run by the Labour Women's Network, so really privileged. I mean, you know, the very things that Jo says, I mean, is today we see a much more divisive society rather than focusing on what we do have more in common and bringing communities together. The era of social media has changed things. There are politicians and people, you know, that have big followings saying things and not thinking about the consequences of what that means. You know, we're always not going to agree on things. There are things that are really divisive, but creating rage or creating misinformation isn't the way to go about solving this. And I think, you know, it worries me. Cohesion really worries me in this country, especially what we've seen of late playing out. And, you know, absolutely horrific what Jo went through to be murdered in the way. And, you know, I know everybody in the country, it was quite a shock. And I can recall it. So, yeah, I mean, this is a really divisive time, I think, that we're living in.
Daisy, do you think is social media the main driver of this, do you think?
I think there are lots of different things. I think we've lost the art in this country of learning to agree to disagree agreeably, as I hope we're doing on this sofa,
yeah.
Right? You know, we can have a bit of a ding-dong on what we think about things, but ultimately we're doing it, you know, through what we're saying rather than what we're doing. I think social media has amplified it. It's certainly pushed people into echo chambers. But there are also malevolent forces, particularly from outside the UK, that are weaponising that. You know, we saw a report just yesterday that Russia was behind those attacks, the arson attacks on the Prime Minister, and has been actively behind mobilising groups online to attack other groups. And we have to take these threats very, very seriously.
I mean, I remember, you know, after the Brexit referendum, I was perhaps naively a little bit optimistic, where I felt like that it was the end of a chapter of that kind of divisiveness. And also the indie ref, let's not forget about that as well, where we said, well, that didn't make us happy. It set us against each other. We're going to move on. And it was just the beginning, really. There were a number of other battlefields, whether it was biological sex, whether or not it was vaccinations or lockdowns. There were lots and lots of huge binary arguments where you sort of had to pick a gang. The optimistic note I want to strike is that I think most people have realised that's a bit facile and it's never going to make you happy. And also, the gang that you think you're in, one day you'll step out of line and say something that they don't like, and then you'll get devoured by your own. So what I think's happened is most of the sensible people have retreated a bit from the culture war. The problem is the people that stayed in it have now been in it a long time. They're like grizzled veterans of this thing, and they don't know how to live any other way. And they're louder and they're more signal boosted than they've ever been. So my view is that the vast majority of people have stepped away from it, but the people that are still there are very active.
Do you think that's true, that the vast majority of people, they're not engaging in this kind of debate, are they? The kind of, you know, very polarised debate that there is online. That's not the majority of people, do you think?
No, but I think, you know, we've got to call it out a bit more. I think people do pick up a lot of what is being said. There are WhatsApp groups, people share information that they've seen, and that, you know, I've knocked on doors in certain parts of my constituency where people will say, I saw this online, is it true? People don't know how to verify what is truth, what is disinformation, what's misinformation. And I think there is a real challenge for all of us in our liberal democracy about, you know, there is the fine line between freedom of speech, and then there is things that really cross that line. And, you know, that's why platforms, you know, this government is expecting, especially online platforms, to take much more responsibility about removing things which are hateful. We've seen increase in hate crimes across the board and targeting of various communities. So it isn't just in the online space. I think what people... sometimes, you know, the rhetoric is that we don't have a fair society, and that might not be true because people don't have the facts. And so there is something incumbent on all of us, whether you're a commentator, journalist, politicians, to make sure we have factual information out there for people.
And that is a good point, isn't it, Daisy? I don't know how many times you find yourself looking at something and going, is that real? Is that, it is a bit of a problem, isn't it? Do you think people have learnt how to navigate that?
I think there are useful parts of civic society that do sort of fact-checking, and, there are broadcasters that have their own service in that regard as well. But there's lots of people, I think as Preet says, I've had a similar experience, people emailing me and actually say, is this true? And, it's nice when somebody actually trusts you as somebody to sort of give them some sources. I think fundamentally what we're seeing, though, is that whilst people are online a lot of the time, we actually need to see community initiatives that bring people together. I'm really proud of the fact that in my constituency of St Albans, we have faith leaders who have come together. They've published a document which says why Jews and Muslims refuse to be enemies, 5 principles for dialogue. And they're going into schools and into community groups saying, we don't agree with each other on a lot of things, but we are prepared to have a discussion about it rather than falling into the trap of hating each other and using inflammatory language. And I think those community initiatives that happen on the ground, school by school, community by community, is the way that we strengthen our civil society so we can resist those forces that are trying to divide us.
And Jeff, just in terms of the rise of populist parties, because it's not just here, is it? It is across Europe as well, that the rise of populist parties they're appealing to something, aren't they, amongst the electorate?
Well, also from, obviously from the right, but also from the left. I do think sometimes left-wing economic populism gets a bit of a free ride, given that the damage that it could do in the fullness of time. So that sometimes gets seen as a bit fluffy, when I think that deserves a bit more scrutiny. And you mentioned about are people checking things. I think you've got to have the motivation to check if something's false or not. I think the Keir Starmer thing, there's many issues I've had.
We can see the headline here, actually, of this is that Russia was behind the arson attack, targeting his property and car and family.
There are so many things, if you're a critic of Keir Starmer, to go for. The problem with this is that you get people who might imagine themselves patriots, who effectively, because they kind of want to believe something, or they've been saying it for long enough before it gets disproved, they end up acting as couriers for a hostile foreign regime. That's the point of always saying the same thing every day online. It's almost like you're kind of leveraged and that you can't pull back. Whereas I think that, certainly personally with things like podcasting, I want to communicate in a forum whereby people can hear what I said, they can hear the tone in which I said it, because almost like the worst ones are these text-only ways of communicating, when the reader can impose whatever anger, resentment or fury is in their mind onto what might have been quite a throwaway or sort of banal statement.
Preet, the fact that Russia was behind this attack and targeting our democracy, were you surprised by that?
I think, look, the security issues for the Prime Minister and targeting his family is of real concern. And I think, not to get into what the courts clearly spoke about, the sort of detail of this, horrific attack, I think is just awful. But just going back to the point, we don't talk enough about women and hate and the targeting of women. And going back to Jo Cox, we see it all the time with bot accounts. There's been some really toxic debates of recent, and the level of hate. I just have to look at some of my ex-account comments of people saying, leave the country, you should all go, you don't belong here. Yeah, I was born and raised here. My grandfather and great-grandfather fought for the British in the World War I, World II. And so there is this piece around education, and where do people go to get information that is accurate and it's correct, because that is the biggest challenge I think that we face, is that there is just going to be much more of this, whether it's state actors or otherwise, and that's the thing that we've got to have to challenge collectively.
For me, I've always been a big supporter of public broadcasting in its broadest term, because I think it's one place where everyone can get their news and information, and that helps to straddle these kind of these echo chambers that do develop on social media. Fundamentally, I think we need to have a much stronger approach to tackling this, and I hope that whether it's through the Online Harms Bill or through extra regulations, that we have a government and a regulator that can work together to tackle this misinformation.